I'm thrilled to welcome back our very good friend and the super talented Molly Suber Thorpe. Welcome back, Molly. Hey, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much. I'm excited for today.
So am I. It's something a little bit different today, actually. I don't think we've ever had a session before at Design Cuts covering watercolor ombre. And this is, it's an effect which I personally love. And so I'm really glad that you're going to be teaching it and that you produced a really, really unique and interesting brush set to back that up as well.
Thank you.
What kind of brought this on, actually? Have you got a love of it as well?
I do. I've long been doing sort of painterly calligraphy with watercolor, like as analog calligraphy, as paint on paper. And I really wanted to create Procreate brushes that emulated that paper effect. But then one of the best things about watercolor, not just for calligraphy, but for painting, is how it changes pigmentation, translucency, how easy it is to change colors just with a dip into a different palette. And so in digital form, that's really tedious because you're changing colors, you're going back to your swatch palette between every letter or stroke. And so thanks to the fact that Procreate allows us now to have a lot more powerful brush creation tools, I was able to create calligraphy brushes that merge colors in your palette together in single strokes and letters. So yes, that's what brought it on, a combination of improved technology and just something I already loved.
And you know what? I love that. We work with a few brush creators, whether it's Photoshop brushes or Procreate, and I always admire the most innovative characters. And you're definitely one of those where a new technology comes out and it's pushing the boundaries of what can be achieved. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm always obsessed with figuring out every new thing that comes out with every update. So
love it. Molly, without further ado, would you like to kick us off and share your screen, please? Thank you.
Yes. Oops, click to close. All right, so you can see my gallery, right?
Yes. Yeah, okay, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so to get us started, I thought we would make something Instagrammable. I like making things that you guys can use and share and tag me in later so I can see what you did. So let's make something square by coming up here to our new canvas. And I'll create a new canvas here. Let's just make this in simple 2000 by 2000 pixels. And I'll leave mine at 300 DPI, but you can make it less than that if you prefer. Okay, so I'm opening up my watercolor calligraphy brush pack here. And like Tom said, today I'm going to really be focusing on those color changing ombre brushes. And there are 10 of them. I made 10 completely different watercolor script brushes, and for each brush, I created an ombre version that appears right below it. So just so that you know when you're navigating the brush pack, that's what you've got here. You've got the single brush with single color, and then right underneath it, the ombre color changing version. But to get us completely started, let's actually draw some watercolor paper in the background to have the most realistic effect possible. So coming down here to my bonus cotton paper background brush at the very bottom of the brush pack, I'm also going to select something sort of off-white. Watercolor paper often has like a cool tone, so let's go with something almost like a bluish off-white. And now I'm just gonna, oh, that's too blue. Let's do it a little bit warmer. Okay, great. Now I'm painting over my canvas. And if I zoom in here a lot, maybe you can see there's a little bit of texture, but it's just because the video is bleaching it out a little bit. You'll see it. There's a lot.
Yeah, it's very subtle though, isn't it?
Exactly. All right. So you're going to see in a moment how with that texture in the background, we'll also be able to make the painted calligraphy look like it's actually dried into the paper, and the calligraphy itself will take on some of that texture, just like real dried paint would. Okay, so let's start by coming over here to the brush pack again. I think I'm going to show you an extremely quick preview of a couple of these to show you how they differ one to the next. So I'm starting with watercolor script number 1 in the ombre version. Now over here in the color palette, I want you to make sure you see that in the top right, you have 2 colors. And this hasn't, I mean, maybe for a little over a year, year and a half, Procreate has had this ability to have 2 colors in your palette. And for many of us, we've used this to create two colors that we can just easily switch back and forth between here in the color palette as we work. And that is extremely helpful. But for these ombre brushes, what these two colors are going to do is it's going to basically create the two colors that merge as we write. And I've designed them to merge in slightly different ways with slightly different characteristics for each brush. So whether they take like an exact midpoint between the two, or whether they stray to the left or right on the color wheel of either one, you'll see it can vary a bit. But we're going to select a couple colors here to use in our palette that we're going to blend together. So, oops, let's choose like a purple violet for one of them. And something complementary, but quite different enough that we'll be able to see a contrast. So we have a purple and we have a blue. All right, so coming over to my purple, I'm going to zoom in. And remember, I'm on Ombre brush number 1. And I just want you to see that if I make strokes and I lift between them, this particular brush number 1 has a very subtle ombre change. We've gone from a pinkish color all the way through the purples and over to an ombre color. I'm sorry, a peachy color. But if I select brush number 2 and keep those same colors in my swatch palette, you'll see that we get quite a different color change because the opacity and the pigmentation, that's quite different. So we go through the fuchsias and stuff like that. I'm only going to show you one more just so that you can really see how these are varied and how you'll be able to play around with them. Oops. This one might be the most watery of them all. Okay, so we go through the pinks and the violets and all of that. And then let me just show you, if I were to change this to say orange, these colors would change. Oops, these colors would change according to the merging of the colors in my swatches. All right, so that was just to show you basically how these ombre brushes work. You select two colors from your swatch palette, and then as you write, when you lift your brush and put it down again, the Procreate essentially moves slightly in the color wheel toward the other color in your swatch palette.
It's kind of genius, honestly. I haven't seen anyone do this before in Procreate. It's so much more interesting visually than just one solid color.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, I agree. And I can't take full credit given that Procreate is the one that came up with this really cool technique. I provided people a link, if they want to download this, of my free letter guide background here. But don't worry, you don't have to follow along with this. I'm just painting this in here. It's a brush from my calligraphy composition maker pack. And I'm just painting this in here so that I have some baselines to work with in my calligraphy. You do not need this particular brush, but like I said, if you want exactly what I just drew, you can download it for free in the link in the top of the chat. So I have my calligraphy grid now here in the background. I put it on its own layer and I reduced the opacity quite considerably so that it doesn't distract. Now I have a new blank layer right above. And here in the watercolor pack as well, I'm coming again to the bottom to my bonus graphite pencil. Pencils, of course, can be really helpful with watercolor, and if you use this particular pencil brush with a color and you reduce the opacity quite a bit, you can actually get the effect of watercolor pencils, which is kind of cool, but that is cool. Side effect. Yeah. But mainly I have this because I personally always love to sketch when I do calligraphy, and I thought I would just include something for the sketching that really emulated a pencil. All right, so I'm going to quickly sketch out my calligraphy, and then we're going to get into the watercoloring of it. So I'm using a short quote today by Anais Nin, and she writes, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." I thought that was I've always thought that was such a beautiful quote, because how can we perceive the world outside of ourselves, right? So we don't see things as they are. Let's start with that. I'm just going to do some pretty simple calligraphy here.
So Molly, I'm sure this is accurate. I remember reading a while back that everyone actually does see colors very slightly differently. Obviously, there's some people that have color blindness and so on and see it very differently. But yeah, even if I look at a blue and you look at a blue, we're both seeing a slightly different blue, but just a very subtle difference. And how kind of magical is that out of the 7 billion plus people on Earth, no two of us see things exactly the same way.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? Because I mean, we can easily perceive that others smell things that we don't, or they like a smell that we dislike, or they can perceive other senses that we can't perceive. So why would vision be different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. All right, so if you followed along with my lessons before, any of my lessons, you'll know that when I'm even doing super quick calligraphy sketches, I like to have one line per layer. So you're going to see that I made this first sketch on one layer, and then I created a new layer for the next one. The reason for that is because I like to be able to quickly and easily move my layers, my lines around. And so without having to use the selection tool, if they're on their own layer, I can just quickly select the whole layer and move it. So let me quickly finish up this quote here. We don't see things as they are. I don't care if things are running into each other. I don't care if they look good. This is about plotting out space. We see them. In fact, I can get even sloppier, as we are. Okay, and then of course the attribution, Ananias's lovely name.
This is nice to watch because normally you're so precise down to the pixel. I'm liking watching rough Molly.
Yeah, I know. I can be very, very, very sloppy, especially my everyday handwriting. I think that surprises people probably.
It's like a doctor's people.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I have snapping turned off. I love snapping, and in the newest Procreate, they've actually added this snapping to smart guides as well as magnetics. But I'm turning it off for now because I want to optically center and move these. I don't care about the math of it. I care that it looks right. And sometimes, very often, those are different things. So I'm going to just quickly move these around and make sure that the lines sort of relate to each other. Let's see. I don't care. Oops, I don't care if they're fully centered either. Just that the flourishes that I'm creating and that I'm going to create sort of mesh one over the next. We'll make her name slightly smaller. Yeah, something like that. And now I can flatten these because I've done my spacing. Oops, I've done my spacing. And I'll merge these now into one layer. Okay. Coming back with my pencil, I'm just going to add a couple more flourishes in that I know, and this is its own whole lesson and I won't get into, but I see some blank spaces. So I'm just going to add some flourishes into them, increase my flourish sizes. Yes, just basic stuff. I don't want that T to intersect the S here. Okay. Cool. And oh, I don't want this Y. There we go. So this is my method when I'm not teaching a class fully on flourishing and it's just me by myself. This is usually how fast I go when I initially lay out a flourished design. So I'm coming down here and reducing the opacity on that. And I should probably mention that I did teach a design cuts class all about this. And I know that you can find it in the learn section.
You read my mind, my mind, Molly. It's in our learn section, but as Molly says, she did a whole class on flourishing. So for everyone that loves Molly's teaching, which I know is basically all of you, please do go check that out in your own time after this session. It's really, really, really useful session. Okay, awesome. So I'm coming back to my color palette now, and I'm switching away from the black I used with my pencil, and I'm coming back to this pink blue palette for now. And in my brush palette, I'll select my watercolor script #1 ombre because, I don't know, I just feel like using that today, I think. And making sure I'm on a new blank layer and not writing over my pencil or on top of my pencil. Going to take a minute and make a few strokes to test the thickness. These are highly pressure sensitive. So I want to make sure that I have the thickness that I want for the thick downstrokes and the thin upstrokes. I think I want a little bit thicker than that. Now remember that brushes, real paint brushes, tend to have slightly lower contrast between super thin and thick strokes. So a lot of the super fine flourishing that you can get with a calligraphy pen may not look so realistic in calligraphy.
that's up to you. It's a personal call, but I kind of like to make the thinnest strokes something that's more realistic to what a paintbrush could actually make. So I think I like this. For people's reference, I have it at 6%. And remember, I have a 300 DPI canvas. So if you do too, then 6% will match what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm coming in here and I want you to first see something. I'm going to turn off the pencil for a second. I did not lift my pen here. And I can already see that from the left side to the right side of this stroke, there is a very slight color change. And that's because these brushes are not only programmed to change color when you lift your pen and put it down again, but also as you write based on pressure and direction. So depending on which ombre brush you have, the intensities of those different changes are slightly different. That's one of the ways that the brushes differ from each other. But this particular brush, it does change slightly based on pressure. So if I keep going here, I do want to lift perhaps a bit more than I normally would with calligraphy so that I can maximize the color change. However, even without lifting, I will get slight color changing that does look sort of ethereal and realistic. Now you're going to find that some of the color changes look dramatic and you get these overlaps, right? And those are not realistic to calligraphy or to watercolor paint, right? In reality, when these are wet, they bleed together and you don't see any sort of stark overlap. But don't worry, there's a brush for that. That's step number 2.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Is that a bit of a we fixed it in post?
Somewhat, sure, yes. There are some things that Procreate still cannot do, and one of them is emulate wet ink. Adobe Fresco does that so beautifully, but Procreate doesn't, at least not yet. Maybe they will one day, but until then,
I'm sure they will.
Use blending brushes to emulate water afterward, and it's a very quick process.
I guess your options, Molly, are you either blend it afterwards or you just do it without lifting at all. That would also work, right?
Yeah, without lifting, you'll never get the overlap, but you'll also have fewer color changes and it will inhibit some of the lettering that you're able to make. For example, the cross of a T, you would have to lift, right? So let's just quickly do that before I even do the rest of the calligraphy, just so that you can see as we go in your mind where we're going with this and how it's going to be possible. So I'm coming over to my smudge tool here next to the paintbrush. And again, in my watercolor palette, I've provided you with 2 special smudge brushes. And the top one is the smudge brush for blending stroke overlaps. Exactly what we need right now. The other, for your reference, is the smudge brush for adding bleed to edges. And that just gives like a bit more of a watery bleed look to your lettering. But we're sticking with the first one, the smudge brush for blending stroke overlaps. So now if I zoom in here to this overlapped area, oops, I left my smudge tool. Okay. I'm on my smudge tool and I'm using, again, this is very pressure sensitive. So I'm using, you can't see it, I'm using tiny circular motions with my fingers, kind of blending these together. Just like a paintbrush with water on it, you are pushing and pulling the pigments that you're on top of. So if I want to here, for example, if I want to push the purple of the downstroke on the right side of the D over to the left, into the bowl of the D, I would literally move in that direction. And I would. Is
it possible to push color outside of the letter form, or is it contained within it?
No, it is possible.
Yeah. Okay. So you just have to be careful.
Yep, you would be careful. And with calligraphy, it's rare that you would well, usually you'll overlap your letters to enough of have material to work with in the overlap and you aren't just blending the very edges. But I hope that I have these gesture controls turned on where if I tap, I change tools and I keep changing away from my smudge brush. So with the brush small enough, you can get a lot of precision here and it goes really fast. I mean, I'm going slowly to show you, but this is usually just a couple seconds for me at the end to smudge everything together. And it doesn't actually have to look seamless because if you imagine in real paint, they do bleed together as if when they're watery, but there's like a concentration of where those two colors meet. So it doesn't look fully like the one color on the left or the one color on the right. It often has like a sort of the perfect meet in the middle, almost like a little pool of the two combined. There you go. So I'm already done with that whole line. Now I'll turn back on my pencil, and again, new line, new layer. Coming back to my brush, and I'll keep going over this. And again, lifting between the strokes that I can. In fact, for example, let me just be specific here. Normally, I would not lift between the I and the N here. This is how I would normally write. I would lift before the bowl of the G, but I wouldn't have lifted in the I and the N. But because I want to exaggerate my color changes here, I am lifting. And I'm going to even lift here where I wouldn't normally. And I'll lift here where I wouldn't normally. And I'll just, keep kind of going over these, sort of lifting when I can. There you go. Oops.
I love the colors, honestly. They're stunning.
Thank you. Oh, that's the end of a word. Sometimes when you're so zoomed in, which is something that you can only get with digital lettering, right? Not real lettering. You get so zoomed in, you don't know where you are in the word. All right. Let's do some of this. Yeah. I think you'll see too that because the brushes have such unique characteristics, each one of them, the ways that they blend and overlap with each other varies. Some of them are far more opaque to start with, and some of them are far more translucent. And needless to say, the more translucent the brush, the more the overlaps are visible. And this is a very translucent brush, which I personally like. That's my preference. So I chose that one today. But let's see. Now we're going to have some fun and make this a really nice little composition here.
I'm starting to really notice how much more often than usual you're coming off with the pressure.
Yes. In fact, when I teach calligraphy, one of the most common questions I get is, should I lift between this letter? Should I lift between that letter? And those rules do kind of go out the window. It's an example of a rule that you can learn to break here because you have a different end goal in mind. The color changing is its own end result that you're after. Okay. Them as you can see that at this point I'm barely even following my guides.
I was going to say, it doesn't matter that we've come off the baseline.
Oh, not at all. But if you were worried about that, of course, you could come to your baseline layer, select it, and just move it down to meet the lettering. I find that easier than moving the lettering because we just played around with getting the letters kind of in the spacing we want. So it's better to move the grid than move the letters.
Smart.
Okay. Oops. Okay. And now just Anais' name, and we'll blend it up. I'm also going to show you today making like a pretty little border to finish off your designs and make it more painterly. Okay, not only are we off the baseline, but we're off the pencil. This ended up being, I had shrunk Anais' name, but in reality, this brush is too thick to really allow for that. So it's going to have to be a bit bigger than I had planned, but that's fine. That's how it goes.
Although you could always shrink it back down afterwards, right?
I could. Yes. All right. So to keep it looking as realistic as possible, like I didn't change paint brushes, I will kind of try to keep it here so that the thick strokes all match the same width as each other, etc. Okay, so turning off the pencil and turning off the grid. There's still some work to do here. There's some spacing issues and of course the blending. And I think it's just a little plain Jane at the moment. We're gonna have to spruce this up a little bit and make it even fancier.
Amazing.
And as a refresher, I'm currently using Ombre brush number 1. And in my color palette, I have a duo pair selected between pink and blue. Oops, no, we want the smudge brush. We're going to come back to the top one, the smudge brush for blending stroke overlaps. And with very, very, very small little circles, we're quickly just going to smudge all of these away.
How much are you going to celebrate when Procreate released that feature to avoid the overlaps?
I will be really happy. I feel like using Adobe Fresco's water feature, where you can just have like a button that says my paint is wet right now, and you can just keep using it. And you click dry and all of your paint dries. Whew, that's like magic. I literally was like breathless when I first saw that. So
I think that's the first time I've heard on these sessions that someone's kind of calling out Fresco as being the better option.
Only for that fun thing. It's not as good for drawing letters yet, unfortunately. I think that there's always competition. Adobe's always trying to figure out how to compete. And of course, Procreate is too. So Procreate will get it one day, I'm pretty sure. Okay, but until then, I honestly think that this gives me some freedom. And what it can also do is that if you see, not just in stroke overlaps, but this brush isn't the greatest example of it, but let's say we used a brush that had more texture in it, right? See how brushes like this, they have a more texture pattern almost inside. And you can use those smudge brushes to smudge out some of that texture too. It's not just for the overlaps. You can also essentially make it look like there are pools of water that, you know, reduced the pigmentation more in some places than in other places. So depending how much you really want to get realistic, you can get more or less. And there's still even more steps we're going to do to make this look as realistic as possible. So
you know what I noticed, Molly, with yourself and Tila Cunningham and many of the super talented creatives that we have on these live sessions?
Yeah.
Attention to detail. That really seems to be one of the things which sets your work apart from people that are earlier in their journey. It's going, you know, zooming in and really kind of finessing all the details and striving for that authenticity and that realism. I just think it matters rather than quickly knocking up some lettering and thinking it's done.
Yes. Well, I cannot not do that, but I completely agree with you. I completely understand what you're saying. It's a blessing and a curse. It's definitely something people should practice. Definitely going into your tiniest details and fixing them. I just remembered a story that I was learning to letterpress print when I was in design school. I took a seminar about letterpress printing because even though I didn't want to become a letterpress printer, I love it and I wanted to make sure I could understand how it was done and everything that went into it. And I took a class with a woman who does the old, like the traditional letterpress printing where she sets literally every single letter of metal type, no digitally printed letterpress plates. Okay, if you've ever done, I mean, oh my gosh, the admiration that I have for anyone who ever laid out a newspaper prior to modern day printing presses, it's incredible. But my point is, she would always say, if you had one piece of metal that was 1/10 of 1 millimeter too low below the rest of the letters, when it printed 10% lighter than every other letter on the page. And I would say kind of like, it's okay, it's fine, I kind of like it. And she says, no, I know you wish it were different. Go back, get it, take the measuring tape, put that little thing in there to raise the letter up and make it how you want it. So yeah, I smiled when you said that, Tom, because I do think of her actually often. It's okay to care about these obsessive details.
I feel like we've all had that one personal teacher in our life. I know I think I gave this story during our birthday event, but how my art teacher at school, he kept telling me to stop being stuck in my comfort zone with the same kind of style. He was like, stop doing that. And he came over and I'd worked for hours on a piece that I was pretty proud of, but it was completely in my comfort zone. And he made me paint over it with white paint and start over. And that stuff stays with you. It's so soul destroying.
We do also, yes, have the soul destroying teachers, but in a good way.
Yeah, they push you.
To make you feel like, really torn down for a moment until you realize that it was what you needed to learn better. Okay, so I'm at the very, very end here of my blending. And once I'm done with this, the next step is going to be to cast my eye over the whole piece and make sure that the words themselves have proper spacing. Make sure that now that I completed the lettering in paint and I completed the flourishes, make sure that there's no wonky negative space that either needs to be filled or adjusted. So my blending is done. Zooming out.
Ooh, it's so pretty.
Thank you. Thank you. It is indeed so far. So I made, remember, each line on its own layer, which means that as I worked, it moved backwards. So my lowest lettering layer is my top layer. So what I then do is I literally physically sit up very straight and I zoom out so I can really be looking far away from my piece. And I just select the selection tool, again, keeping snapping off because I don't want any help geometrically or mathematically here. This is all optical centering. So I'm coming in and I'm just sort of centering these and getting the flourishes and the kerning how I like so that everything sort of fits like a puzzle together. Okay, and now if you swipe swipe to the right really quickly on your layers, you can select them all and I'm going to hit group. So now all of my lettering is in one group. I didn't want to merge this really into one layer because I might still want to go back and have my lines separated. So I'm keeping it together in this group, but I'm now going to swipe left and duplicate my whole group. So tip number 1, if you want to darken slightly translucent calligraphy, watercolor calligraphy, all you have to do is duplicate your layer. If you see, I turn off that duplication, I turn it back on again. Because of the semi-translucent quality of the strokes, when it doubles on top of itself, it gets darker and brighter. So that's already one way to change the quality and characteristics of your paint. But I'm not going to do that yet here. I'm turning off my lower group, tapping the top group once and hitting flatten. So now I do have this on one layer by itself. Now I'm going to make sure uniform is on. I still have snapping off, but I don't want to change the aspect ratio. But I'm just shrinking this slightly and moving it slightly more into the center of my canvas. All right, so now here's a tiny little trick, and I just am going to zoom in like a lot here and hope that you can really see this. I'm coming over to my layer and I'm going to tap this N here, which is where we can change blending modes. And by default, it's always on normal, but I want that paper, the paper texture we drew at the beginning, to bleed through so that, like I said, it can look like the cotton fibers of the paper really affected the paint as it dried, as it would in real painted calligraphy. So all I'm going to do is change to linear burn, 2 up. Oh, I'm looking at the video. It's not super, super noticeable. I hope that you do this at home, though, and you see that once you do it once, you realize all of it.
Oh, yeah, you can see when you zoom in.
Like this. Yeah, the little fibers of the texture actually pop through and get a bit darker. So it really looks like it's more one with the paper. So that's a small detail, but I find it essential. Okay. So next, I'm going to, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to just do something real quick here because I think it's just going to look so much nicer, which is to come into a new blank layer, do Canvas, Drawing Guide, Edit Drawing Guide. And I also taught a class about symmetry, so you can also go watch that in the Learn section. But
You're racking up the classes with us, Molly, I have to say.
Yeah,
definitely one of our favorite teachers.
Too fast, so that if you don't know what I'm doing, don't worry. I did also teach something on this, so I'm not throwing out whole new material here.
Yeah, if anyone wants to go on our Learn section and simply search for Molly, then you will be occupied for the next 2 weeks, I think, with incredible sessions. Okay, so here in Drawing Guides, I'm in Symmetry, Quadrant, and I'm turning on Rotational Symmetry. And all I'm going to do here is just make like a cute little flourish around the edge just because I can't resist. So I'm still on my Ombre brush.
I'm on a new blank layer. Because I was on the blank layer when I started or turned on my guide, you can see that the word assisted now appears here under the layer name. If you don't have assisted turned on, you'll need it to use this feature. So all you do is tap the layer once and you make sure that drawing assist here is selected. Okay, so now you can see that when I paint, it paints around the entire canvas. And all I'm going to do is paint just some waves. Oh yeah, this is the different brush. I'm on number 1. I switched to number 2 to demonstrate, but I want this to match my lettering. This is just super quick, but I think it adds a lot. There you go. Done.
Beautiful. That looks like it's on a envelope. I'd love to get that on the front of an envelope in the post.
Yes, and then these can be nicely printed too. I mean, making borders just in general, like watercolor or not, making borders really completes calligraphy compositions. Quite a bit. All right,
Massively.
and then one more minute to show you the other ways that you can just take the realism of the lettering to the next level. It would be, let's just make a new layer here. And I'm going to scroll up in my brushes. I'm going to scroll down in my brushes. And I'm going to select a watercolor wash. I'll select watercolor wash number 1. Now, let me just show you. I have the opacity completely turned up. So I just want to show you that this is how it looks with full opacity. You can see that it really just looks like you've taken a big watery round brush and sort of daubed it down on your paper. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just reduce the opacity dramatically and increase the size. And this again is very pressure sensitive. So I'm just creating it a little bit in the background to sort of like make it look like I'd created a very light watercolor wash on my paper before I had done my calligraphy. And I'll change it to linear burn, reduce the opacity slightly. And I think you'll just have to trust me that it makes a big difference if you can't see in the video. You can only slightly see. I can see that it adds a watery texture. So you at home.
No, we can see. Stunning.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's stop there. I think I covered quite a bit.
You did.
I'd love to take your questions and hear your feedback on it.
Yeah, incredible. So thank you as always, Molly. Great session.
Thank you all. I really love it.
Super fun. This is a brand new pack. Do you mind maybe bringing it up on your browser, the actual page at Design Cuts for this new pack? And then we can perhaps just skim through that and show people everything that's included.
Yes. So it's this first one here in my shop, the Watercolor Calligraphy Brush Pack, and we do have it on sale right now, so that's exciting.
Yeah, so you can check this page out and grab the brushes.
I'm zooming in here to show you that if you go to the product page, you can see that all 10 of the script brushes that are optimized, they're optimized for calligraphy, but they have different characteristics. So they'll all work for flourishing and they're all really pressure sensitive, but where they differ is in terms of opacity, pigmentation, and texture, as well as a bit about how thick and thin they can get. So lots of different lettering. Okay, so number 9 is one of my own favorites. I didn't use it in the demo because I wanted things to be as high contrast as, like, much higher contrast for you to see, but 9 makes the most ethereal, like soft, watery, beautiful lettering. I think 9 is my favorite, but 1 and 2, I don't know, are probably what I'm using the most in my work right now, but 9 is what I play with the most. So
nice. So people seem to really like the variants in opacity and so on.
Yes, and those come with both pressure and length of time. So you'll see as you play with them that they change their opacity differently. And then all 10 of those brushes come in the ombre version. So really you're getting 20 watercolor script brushes, 10 that are ombre, 10 that are the regular single color versions. And so these are the ombre effects of each of these 10 above that relate.
Stunning. Love the ombre effect.
Yeah, I really love it as well. And then you get a little cheat sheet that comes, a little PDF and Procreate file cheat sheet that just kind of shows you, what's in the pack and just helps you if you, need like a little quick guide reference to some of the techniques that I just mentioned. This shows you the 4 watercolor washes. The one I demonstrated was wash number 1. And then I have a lot of samples here of what you can do. And I've told you in their captions which brush I used for which project, so that you can compare. There are background brushes as well, by the way. There are also splatter brushes. So you can have a lot of fun. I'm only demonstrating the ombre today. Oh, and you can do delicate illustrations as well. I've been doing a lot of actually illustrative borders with these. You've got your splatters. You've got some modern calligraphy.
I really like the pretty translucent lettering like that. Actually, I can see why you're enjoying this at the minute so much, Molly. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm personally having a lot of fun. In fact, it's maybe a brush pack I've had the most fun with that I personally created.
Incredible.
Stop the share?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Molly, thank you again for joining me today. That was great.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, I'll chat really soon. Take care.